All right, let's look at a couple quick examples of equations that have x squared in them. So taking a look at this first one, negative 2x squared plus 11 equals negative 39. By the way, remember you can pause this at any time if you want to just jot down the equations real quick or something like that. I'm trying to get x by itself, so just like I would solve any other equation, I'm going to start by getting rid of my addition and subtraction. So this plus 11, I'm going to get rid of that with a minus 11 and a minus 11. And I end up bringing down negative 2x squared equals negative 50. Now, I know some of you are really anxious to take a square root here, and you've got the right idea, but before I can take a square root, I want to make sure that I'm down to just what's being squared. And in this problem, only the x is being squared. So before I can take a square root, I need to get rid of this negative 2. So I'm going to divide by negative 2, divide by negative 2, and I'm left with x squared equals 25. Let me move this up here. X squared equals 25. Now is when I get to take my square root. Okay, so now I'm going to go square root, and remember when you take a square root, you do get two different answers. So here I would get x equals 5 or x equals negative 5. Okay, got to have both answers for it to be considered to be correct. By the way, you could write this as x equals plus or minus 5. That would be acceptable as an answer as well. Now, one thing I want to point out here is what that means is if I take 5 and plug it back into this equation, I'm going to get negative 39. It also means that if I take negative 5 and plug it into this equation, I'm going to get negative 39. And the reason for that is, whether I put 5 or negative 5 right here, that x squared is going to become a 25. Okay, either way. And then negative 2 times 25 plus 11 gives you the negative 39. So that's why you end up with two solutions. Okay, let's look at our next one. So 3x squared plus 5 equals 2. Again, let's start with the minus 5 minus 5. So I get 3x squared equals negative 3. And then let's divide by 3. Divide by 3. Moving over here, I end up with x squared equals negative 1. And then here's where I would take a square root. Now help me out. What's the square root of negative 1? Okay, if you try it in your calculator, you might get sort of a surprising result. You probably get an error message of some kind. Okay, the reason for that is, remember, when I'm looking for a square root, and I'm going to kind of slide off to the side here. When I say, for example, looking up at that first one, that the square root of 25 is 5, okay, and we know that it's also negative 5, but just stick with me here. So square root of 25 is 5. The reason for that is because 5 times 5 equals 25. I also know that the square root of 25 could be negative 5, because negative 5 times negative 5 equals positive 25. But now let's say that I wanted the square root of negative 25. Well, the only way I can do something times something and get a negative number is if one of my numbers is positive and one of my numbers is negative. So the only way I can make this happen is a positive 5 and a negative 5. But then I don't have two of the exact same number, and that's what you have to have a square root. So here I had 5 and 5, here I had negative 5 and negative 5, but you can't take two of the exact same number and multiply to get a negative, because you have to have one positive and one negative. So this is impossible, which means this is impossible. Anytime you take a square root of a negative number, there is no solution. Okay, so for this one I would just end that by saying no solution. Now you're going to want to be careful, because you can't tell by looking at a problem that it's going to be no solution. For example, when I looked up at this top one, it ended with a negative number. I have a lot of people who want to say, oh, it's a negative right away, it's no solution. You can't make that decision until you're actually at the point where you're taking the square root. Because see, this one worked out just fine and it had a positive number here. But when I go to take that square root, if I have a negative number, that's when I know it's no solution. Okay? Now it's your turn. You're going to try a couple of these on your own.